Stephen King is everywhere right now, from our TV sets with The Mist and an upcoming shared universe show, Castle Rock, to the theaters with The Dark Tower, and It. It seemed like a good time to start off our new video series that we like to call The Us List. No? How about 1 out of 10 us's? 10 of us, top us ones. You know what? It's just a top 10 list, so let's all relax. We polled our entire staff, which is big, that's not a dick joke, I promise, to find out what everyone's favorite Stephen King movies are, and now we're going to count them down. Starting, or rather ending our list at number 10, was the only Stephen King movie actually directed by Stephen King, Maximum Overdrive. Hey, we're not saying it's a good movie, but we always manage to have fun with it anyway. Plus, it's really hard to hate a movie that has a big truck with a giant green goblin face on the front of it. Although Stephen King blames all the cocaine for how badly this one came out, we think perhaps it could have been much worse without it. Moving up the list to number 9 is The Dead Zone. I'm honestly surprised that this David Cronenberg-directed movie didn't rank higher. I've always said it's one of Christopher Walken's best performances, and I'll never get that deputy with the scissors scene completely washed out of my brain. I'm going to chalk this one's lower position up to a lot of folks just never having seen it. Fix that, folks, now. Coming in at the 8th spot is The Green Mile. Written and directed by Frank Darabont, who also scribed and helmed 2 other films higher up on our listings, Tom Hanks is as lovable as ever as a prison guard. Michael Clarke Duncan wants us to give him our hands, and Doug Hutchinson is one of the most hateable characters in films ever. A little too cornball for some, nonetheless, The Green Mile is about the darkest touchy-feely movie ever, and some folks love it. Our next film slid around on this list quite a bit until the final numbers landed it at number 7, and that movie is the King anthology film Creepshow. The screenwriting debut for King and his acting debut as well, the film pulled in the legendary and now dear departed George Romero to direct, who would later do the sequel and an adaptation of King's The Dark Half. Neither one of those made our list. Based on the old EC horror comics, Creepshow is silly, scary, and a lot of fun. Almost to the halfway mark is our number 6 pick, The Mist. This is one of those other Frank Darabont ones I mentioned earlier, and it was extremely controversial with horror and King fans for its new ending, which was definitely a love it or hate it type of affair. King himself said, "Frank wrote a new ending that I loved. It is the most shocking ending ever, and there should be a law passed stating that anybody who reveals the last 5 minutes of this film should be hung from their neck until dead." That sounds like the plot of a Stephen King book. It appears that most of our staff agreed with the man himself. Coming in at the middle point, number 5, is Brian De Palma's version of Carrie. I say his version because there was a 2002 TV remake and a 2013 film one. Just watch the original 1976 version, which got nominated for 2 Oscars and more or less launched the careers of Sissy Spacek, John Travolta, Nancy Allen, William Catt, that's right, the greatest American hero, and Amy Irving. Sure, it's super dated, but for us that just adds to the bloody fun. We'll see you at the prom. It's your turn to bring the pig's blood. Heading into the home stretch at 4 is Misery, the only horror film directed by Rob Reiner, although not the only film he directed on our list. Misery had show-stopping performances by Kathy Bates and James Caan. Bates actually holds the distinction of being the only actor in a Stephen King film to win an Oscar for her performance in it. Hell, it's the only King film that actually won an Oscar. Steve writes a lot of stuff about writer nightmares, to be sure, but none of them ever disturbed us quite like this one. We're its biggest fans. Top 3! And the bronze winner is the other Rob Reiner film, Stand By Me. Arguably one of the best Bildungsroman ever made, or for those of you less pretentious than me, coming-of-age stories. It pretty much launched the careers of its young stars Will Wheaton, River Phoenix, Corey Feldman, and Jerry O'Connell. Oh, and Kiefer Sutherland as well. And John Cusack was in it. King called it autobiographical, and that might be the most disturbing thing to think about that he ever wrote. The first runner-up at number 2 is the third Darabont picture on our list, The Shawshank Redemption. Very popular with critics at the time, and even garnering 7 Oscar nods, it bombed in theaters upon release. But now, thanks to repeated airings on cable over the years, it's considered one of the greatest films of the 90s and is number 1 on IMDb's user-ranked top 250 movies, beating out even The Godfather. What's not to love? Look at that, the last one, and I'll bet you already know what I'm going to say. Coming in at the top of the top, and by a sizable vote margin, Children of the Corn! No, I'm just kidding. It is, of course, Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of what many think is also King's best book, The Shining. Jack Nicholson was absolutely terrifying as possessed dad Jack Torrance, and it became one of his most iconic roles. Believe it or not, this movie, now almost universally regarded as one of the best horror movies ever made, got nominated for 2 Razzies when it was released. Who picks those things anyway? We pretty much all love the hell out of this film and recommend that if you haven't seen it yet, or if it's been a while, it's time to cue it up. Well, that's it for our first top 10 list. Let us know what other top 10 lists you'd like to see us do. But for now, this is Chris Cox, and crap, I'm going to have to revise this thing once everyone sees the new version of it, aren't I?
Oneofus.net has been your one-stop shop for all things geek for years. But there's a side to them many of you have never heard. The subscription side. Subscribe and listen to great podcasts like The Breakfast Pub, The Original Gentleman, and the Watch a Movie With Us series. Head on over to Oneofus.net and don't forget your towel.